Good morning, everyone. Thank you for signing up for this Stump the Archivist webinar from Washington State Archives. We'll be doing a similar webinar every month, so join us for future webinars too. No two webinars are going to be the same. Research Archivist Tracy Rebstock. Wave, Tracy. Hi, Tracy. Tracy's going to be our host. She's going to be hosting all these Stump the Archivist webinars for the foreseeable future. This is primarily a Q&A session, which will start after Tracy does a little talk. After that, feel free to chime in with any questions you have about your research, genealogy, or go ahead and put your questions in the comment section, which you can find, it should be on the right side of your screen if you click on the little bubble conversation icon. And without further ado, Tracy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Jameson. Hello, everyone. Hopefully everybody's having a great Friday. This is a little experiment that we started during Archives Month. I did one in October of 2021, and it seemed to be popular enough that we thought it might be fun to continue it. So here we are. I will pick a topic to kind of talk about a little bit just to get everything started while you can sit and think about all the questions you could potentially ask me. And I will do my very best to answer those questions or at least help direct you. And in some cases, I may have to have us pick up the conversation offline, and I'll give you an email address or something for you to contact me so we can do some additional speaking. But I am coming to you live from the stacks. So you can see behind me, that's not a special screensaver. I'm actually sitting downstairs in the stacks, hoping the Wi-Fi works down here really well. And so far, so good. But I'm on the first floor of the archives in our building in Olympia. And we have a couple different ways that you can access our records. One is you can visit our digital archives, and maybe many of you have already done that, but I'm going to share my screen and just show you that option real quick. Let's see here. Let's do this. So the digital archives, if you guys can see the web page, just give me a thumbs up for those of you who I can see video wise. Perfect. So this is the digital archives, and you can Google search this, you can bookmark this, but this is a great way to get started in our collections doing research or doing anything having to do with the state of Washington. The archives is a division under the Office of the Secretary of State, and we basically collect both state and local government records. That's our mandate by law, by RCW. And we do also collect some records sometimes having to do with the history of the state of Washington, but mostly how it pertains to legislators or folks who have served in office, such as like a city clerk or a county commissioner or a judge, that sort of thing. But most of the time it is government related records. And we also have some things that are not traditionally such, but we have some sister organizations that collect Washington state history as well. And so often when you contact us, we can direct you to a great place. So we have a state Washington Historical Society located in Tacoma. They collect a lot of great historical information about the state and the peoples of Washington, as well as our state library has a lot of great published collections. The difference between the archives and the library is that many of the items that we hold in our collections have never been published. They're original materials, as opposed to something in the library which has been published. So this is one way you can go into it, and this is a great way to search for people or places. We have a lot of different types of things on the digital archives, and they are actually cataloged in a way that not normal archive stuff is. Most of the time, archives, at least for us in the government archives, it's by a collection or a large series of boxes, and it's less down to the itemized level. Here in the digital archives, you can search for something down to like an actual document, an actual photograph. And so that's really cool. The other way you can search our collections is going to our website, which is shown here on the screen in front of you. Give me a thumbs up just so I can make sure that people are seeing our archives website. Jameson, thank you.
Yes.
And this is a way that you can do research. This actually, the State Archives is made up of 5 regional branches. The Digital Archives, our Record Center, which helps support state government. And then we have Records Management Team. We have Imaging Services Team. We have Security Microfilm. We have a lot of different people under us. And this is a great way to find everyone. But if someone is interested in doing research, you can go to the research bar, and there's an actually archives catalog link here. Now, for most people, knowing who created what, you might be looking for someone in your family, but you're not sure exactly where to start. I always tell people, start with the digital archives first, because you can search by name. But a lot of times when you come to the catalog, a lot of people will want to search by name here. And this is actually the best place to look for here is keyword, if you're looking for larger type things. So for instance, I might want to search something about, I'm going to pick something that ties into our topic of the day, which is restricted records. So let's say I want to look up, let's say on one of my census research, I found out that my person spent some time at Northern State Hospital. So I decided to search for that. And it is a keyword search, so it pulls up anything and everything having to do with that topic. So you can see that the listing here, this may or may not make sense to you, depending on your research that you've worked on before. And this is why I wanted to show how different it is when you might throw something in. Notice I'm not even seeing in the first few entries, I'm not even seeing anything about Northern State Hospital. Maybe a little further down, it looks like I've got some floor plans here. And if I scroll further down the page, you'll see all kinds of interesting names. Budget Control, Department of Budget Control, Department of Finance. There's all these really interesting records. Until I get down here into institutions, I'm not really seeing a lot about the Northern State Hospital. And this is just kind of gives you a little glimpse as to how sometimes government records are arranged. Often they are arranged by the creator. So for instance, the name of the department or agency that existed at that time. And then after that, maybe a particular branch of that. So in the case of Northern State Hospital, for a long time, they were under what they called the Department of Institutions. And so that's listed under something slightly differently. So it's not necessarily as intuitive. The other thing I want to point out is that if at any point you're on our page and you're navigating these things and you're like, boy, I don't really get what I'm looking at, or I'm not really sure what I'm looking at, or am I even in the right place? Look around for the Ask an Archivist button. So on this page, there's nothing, but if you go back one to the first, you'll see it right here. And this will generate an email that will send a question our way. And we always enjoy getting emails to help clarify our collections. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to select something that I know is going to have restrictions, because today I'm going to talk a little bit about restricted records before we get into the Q&A portion. And so I'm going to click on this, and it's going to show a little excerpt here. Let me scroll down a little bit here. I'm using my favorite thing, the trackpad. I don't know about the rest of you, but trackpads are super fun sometimes, especially when you want to do something. All right. So in this case, I'm interested in the record of admissions, and I've pulled up the catalog record, and it's telling me that it's partially restricted, and it lists an RCW. And this kind of is a great segue into our topic for today, the little thing I'm going to cover, and that is restricted records. So primarily, a lot of the government records that are created in the state of Washington are open to the public for public viewing. We have a very open Public Records Act This act came into being in 1972, and it was an initiative by the people. So the people of Washington are the ones who asked for this law to go into place so that they could have open and transparent government. But with opening up the records, they did decide that there are some responsibilities we have to some of the records where there might be reasons why things need to be restricted. Sometimes just for a short period of time, and other times possibly for long periods of time. And in the case of any restrictions that we have, they are governed by law. So the Revised Code of Washington, which is what the RCW stands for, does kind of help us navigate which records are restricted and which records are not. And we're able to cite the statute whenever we have people asking for access to the records. We try to cite that law that basically supports the record being restricted. I will say that in other places I've worked, and in some places I've worked with, I've heard people talk a lot about confidential records, confidentiality, and in this case, it's more about what the law states as opposed to what someone might consider a record that might not be easy for people to see or have content that might be difficult to address. So this is more based on the law, and a lot of times it is to protect individuals or institutions. In this case, the Northern State Hospital admissions, for instance. And so for a long time, the admission of a patient to one of the state hospitals was considered restricted. It's not something that's open to the public. The only people that would know about it would either be people involved in the case or those who worked in the hospital. And I think sometimes when people are doing research now, they're like, well, it's been, if you look at maybe the earliest records from 1911, it's been a long time. It's been over 100 years. Is that still the case? And those are all good questions when it comes to restricted records. Like, how long are they restricted? Are they restricted forever? In many cases, the way the laws are written is that they don't give a time frame. They basically say the law just states that these are restricted. It doesn't say after a certain amount of years these are open. It just says that. So we do have a policy for the viewing of restricted records or restricted records guidance at the archives. And basically, pursuant to one of the laws about the archives, RCW 4014, it talks about that records that are confidential or exempt from public disclosure while in possession of the originating agency have to be withheld. And then even if they're transferred to the archives, often that restriction needs to be held. And that's a lot of legal jargon. If you want some light reading, you can pull up the Revised Code of Washington 4014 or 4256, which is our Public Records Act. And you can read all about why it's there, all the different provisions, and then some of the exceptions. I say all this to say that we don't just say the things are most of the time in archives, especially in government archives, we want to provide access to our records. That's why we're here. That's what we want to do. We love digging into them. But just know that sometimes there are records that come with those restrictions. And even if you see it in the catalog, contact us and talk to us, and we can talk to you about what those restrictions are and help you navigate the record further. So I've just said a lot of things. So Jameson, do we have any questions that have popped up since I've been talking?
Our first question popped up about 5 seconds ago.
Okay, perfect. Fire away.
From Linda Thompson, she said, "Why is it so difficult to get a death certificate of a loved one? My grandfather died in 1969. I would like to add his death certificate to my family collection. Sent my birth certificate, my mother's birth certificate to prove relationship, yet application was rejected."
So in January of 2021, the Vital Records Act changed significantly when it comes to access to death records. Death, birth, marriage, and divorce, all they changed some restrictions on those records. And what we've been doing is we have been working with the Department of Health to post death records from 1907 to, I think if my math is correct, 1996 or 1997. I think maybe we've clicked to 1997 now that we're in 2022. Up on the digital archives. And that has been a very arduous process. As you can imagine, there's a lot of records, and they have been putting them up, and literally daily new records are going up. So in the case of the death record from 1969, those are open to researchers. The only caveat is if you want it certified by the Department of Health, that would be the only thing that would have to go through the Department of Health. But currently what's happening is they are being ingested into the digital archives, and they are working on getting those in and up so people can have access to them. So I don't know if you've already checked there and it does not exist. I know that when they decided to open the floodgates, it was, I mean, they basically opened from 1907 to 1996 in January 1, 2021. And that was a lot of records. So they've been slowly but surely getting those up and into the digital archives. So at this point, they should be up there. But if you can't find it, so I would go to the digital archives. I would check for the certificate. If you cannot find it, I'm going to give you an email address. Research, and I'll have Jameson put it in the chat too. research@sos.wa.gov. Ask us and we can try to get you connected to the right people. Great question.
All right, anybody else have a question that you're ready to ask? Don't be shy about just turning on your volume and asking the question, or you can just type it in the comments.
Yeah, it doesn't have to do with restricted records either. You can ask me anything. It doesn't even have to do with the state of Washington. You can literally ask me anything. You can put them in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and talk to me.
Hi, this is Ed Huber, and I do have a question.
Okay.
And it may be a little bit esoteric. I'm looking into finding land abstracts. My understanding of what an abstract is a compilation of all the owners and ownership of land parcels in the state of Washington.
Yes. Yes.
And how would I go about finding those?
So most of the time, land abstracts are created for a title company, but there are exceptions as far as like when it comes to county. Like if the county has owned land, they'll often keep a land abstract of all the land they've ever owned, or state. In fact, I had a researcher asking me about the state abstracts we have for Washington State University in Pullman.
All right.
And I will just say this. If it's just a person who owns the property, it's a little easier than like if it's an entity like the state of Washington or Clark County, because there's lots of different parcels and pieces of land in that space. So I guess I'll ask, are you looking for someone's ownership of property, or are you looking for like a state or local entity's ownership of property?
It's a county owned property that was homesteaded back in the late 1860s.
Okay.
And I'm tracking some individuals who first owned land.
Okay.
And so if I understand you correctly, that I should be able to go approach the county, and they would have generated an abstract when they first acquired the land.
Yes, and sometimes they will still have it and sometimes they will not. So that's one way to go for it. The other thing you can do is you can start at the beginning. So if you go to glorecords.blm.gov, right, you can start with like the earliest patents and surveys of the land.
Hmm.
And then depending on ownership, the other thing that's tricky about early ownership is, let's say somebody bought tons of land. So there's a lot of land transactions happening, and you're trying to just track your piece of that puzzle. Sometimes that can make it really tricky. But oftentimes, if it's about an individual's land, you can use the county's grantor grantee indexes to trace ownership. Some of those we have, depending on the county, it would be in the archives, or it could still be with the county auditor's office.
Okay, very good. Well, that's very helpful information. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Our next question is from Melanie. She said she's trying to find birth records for Orcas Island, 1890 and 1893, and not showing up on the state archives.
Okay. So let me tell you a little bit about birth records. Oh, Jameson, will you put do you know the GLO records.blm?
GLO.blm?
Mm-hmm. It's GLO records.blm.gov. So the thing about birth records so we became a state in 1889. Obviously births happened in the state of Washington prior to that. It has nothing to do with the law, right? But the law in 1891 required physicians, midwives, to record the birth if they were there to witness it. But the other thing we know about early births is sometimes there was no doctor present at the time. But in 1891, they were required by law to record the death, birth or death. If they were at the event, they were to record it. They usually had a birth return that they would submit either to a city clerk or to a county auditor's office. And then the other possibility is that a birth could have occurred and it would have shown up in a newspaper as an announcement. Maybe the family posted it later. Sometimes if there was a local hospital and it happened at the hospital, but they would have been required to register it. But I will say that a lot of births were not registered in the state of Washington prior to 1920 for a variety of reasons. And then a lot of people filed for their birth later when they did the Delayed Records Birth Act in 1941. So I will be honest with you, to find a birth, if they belong to a church, it is possible it's in a church record. If it happened on farmland, it would be in the family Bible. I don't know if there would be a official register of the birth unless it happened as a delayed birth. And then I have seen births show up in like minutes of a county commissioner or minutes of a city clerk or I mean, just really interesting places like it was an early recording that was done. No actual certificate was written out. So finding early births can be very tricky in the state of Washington sometimes. I hope that helps a little bit or gives you some places to look.
All right, our next question is from Paula. She said, I've been trying to find info on the Working Men's Educational Association of Western Bohemian Moravians of Aberdeen. So far, a Google search found it in Washington State Incorporated Companies from 1914 to 16.
So I'm going to say that you're probably looking for the records of that entity, but if you send us an email, I can give you the articles of incorporation if they exist and any additional information that might have been filed with the state. The other possibility, it would depend on if they did any if they owned any property, or if they were involved in any land disputes, or anything like that that might show up in a government record. And I know we do have a lot of records from Grays Harbor and from the Aberdeen area. So if you wanted to send me some information about what you're looking for, I might be able to connect you. It's probably a lot of places for me to list, more than I'm going to list in this moment. But shoot me an email. And I think the thing about entities, that gives a good question. If you're looking for like a business or something that operated in the state of Washington, I've had a lot of people asking that over the last probably month in research. And we do a lot of corporations research and business research here in Olympia, and we can often find like when they were incorporated, who might have been involved, some of the early filings with the state. But as far as like the actual business papers, a lot of times those they could end up in local government, local historical societies, local museums, local libraries. They could also end up at the State Historical Society, or a smaller version of the historical society. A local historical society can sometimes collect those things. But business records are not, unless the family kept them and then turned them in as part of family papers, those are harder to find. And sometimes, you're right, Roxanne, the Genealogical Society could definitely have stuff about businesses and corporations. Thank you for that reminder, Roxanne.
Okay, let's see. Heather is looking for a divorce record sometime between 1946 and 1950, but don't know which county. Will the Records Act change that you mentioned make this easier to find?
So the bad news is the state of Washington did not start keeping a collective index of divorces until 1968. So before that time, they were done at the county level. So there are potentially 39 counties whose court records you would have to check for that divorce. Occasionally, you can see those postings in old newspapers, which might be easier to search. But then if you kind of have it narrowed down to, if you know where they were at the time of the divorce, or if you know they moved soon after their divorce, sometimes you can say, okay, well, for instance, I had someone contact me and say that they thought either the person was in Clark County or in Thurston County. And if you're able to narrow it down to that, then we could check to see if we can find a divorce if we have a Superior Court index in our possession, we can do that and kind of narrow it down. Unfortunately, there's not an easy way. One of the things, on the dream list is for us to get all of our civil, domestic case files indexed, or at least get them indexed and up where people can find them and search for them. But as you can imagine, it's an arduous task. Most of them are in handwritten indexes. So.
Next, Kim asked do you have local newspapers digitized in the collection, and are they searchable online?
So we do not here at the Washington State Archives have newspapers, but our sister institution, the State Library, has lots of great newspaper resources. And I can send a link. I can ask Jameson to put the link to the newspapers from the State Library's website. And maybe I can share my screen and just show you where it is real quick, just so you can see where it is out there. I'll do that real quick, just so everybody else can see as well. Chronicling America is a really great resource for digitized newspapers as well. They have a lot of things, and even some of our smaller newspapers from here in Washington are included in that. I'm going to take us to the library, and this is their newspaper page. I don't know if Jameson can capture this, or if you guys can capture the URL up there, but it's sos.wa.gov/library. That'll get you to the library landing page, and if you do research and collections on that page, one of the listing is the historic newspapers will also take you there. But this has links to what they have currently online, what they have in their collections, and then it does give some places for you to look for additional resources. Also, if you have a library card at your local library, often they have, with your library card, you will have access to newspaper databases. There's a lot of really great resources for that. There are also a lot of newspapers that have not been digitized and are still on microfilm and things. So, but the collection is always growing, which is really great. And I did see somebody mention the Seattle Municipal Library. A lot of the libraries have collections that are available to anyone, regardless of whether or not you have a card. So it's always good to take a look at those collections to see what's out there and available. But if you haven't had a library card in a while, or you're not sure if your library card is good, this is a good time for you to re-up your library card and support your local library, because they often have lots of really great resources that are available with your library card. All right, next question.
Next question is from Susan. She asked, she said, we have two brothers from our family who were at Northern State. One died while there. Is it possible to learn anything about their records? Is that going to be restricted?
So if you know, so the only information that we can give is since you know they were there, we can confirm they were there and maybe the dates they were there, but we won't have any additional, we don't have patient files. We wouldn't have patient files anyway. That's not something we collect long term. We do have things about how Northern State Hospital was run, maybe their annual reports. There's things about like that you could read up about their time there that doesn't have anything to do with them specifically, but would talk about like how we have an administrative file, should we say, about Northern State Hospital. But the Department of Health and Social Services, so DSHS, they have a link. If you want to try to request patient files from the state hospitals, they have a link where you can make a request for those files if they still exist. And it will depend on how long ago it was, because they had, for retention purposes, I don't think they keep them beyond 75 years. And after that, I'm not sure they're not kept in perpetuity. So occasionally people have been able to find them. It's been a little easier to find records from Eastern or Western state hospitals, but it's worth at least an ask. And you can email me and I can send you the link on how to request for information from them, and they can tell you whether or not they have it or not. All right, Jameson, next.
Susan, I was curious about clarification on your last comment when you said he died there where buried.
Oh, did you ask him where he was buried?
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
But she had another part of her question, so
okay. All right.
While she clarifies that part, let's move on to the next part. Let's see. Susan says, I have a brick wall. A grandfather died, and on Ancestry it lists info from Washington Select death certificates 1907 and 1960. All it lists is his name and the name of his wife. Oral family history is that he died in Oregon. I have searched digital archives in Washington and GFO in Oregon. Can't find any relevant information or documents.
Okay. And I want to ask if have you searched recently? Because we recently put up, so we've released the death records from 1907 to 1960 on the digital archives. So many of them are up there. There are lots of them that are not up there yet. And if you have a area where those early records are arranged by like district, and some of them are by city and some of them are by county. So if it was a larger city, there's actually a Seattle district, but there's also a King County district. So if you know potentially where in the state that you believe he may have passed, I might be able to see if we can find an actual certificate from the ones that are not up yet, and you could email me and let me know. And then the other possibility is if you've already checked with the Oregon Vital Statistics to see if they have his death record. I'm guessing if he showed up on at the indexing for state here in Washington State, that he may have a certificate from here, but I could be wrong. Some of those indexing, the citations for some of those indexing sometimes is kind of difficult to translate on Ancestry.
Let's see.
And then the follow-up question for, are you looking to see if the person at Northern State Hospital was buried at Northern State Hospital, or?
She said if he died in Washington, it would have been Whatcom County, 10 Mile, or Whatcom CO. I'm assuming that is short for county. 10 Mile, and then his name is Richard Hyder.
Susan, I'm going to ask that you send me an email, and then I can respond. And Jameson can give you the email address, and just put it to my attention, and I'll take it.
She's actually emailing in since she's on a cell phone. It's easier than doing chat, so I'm going to just email it back to her.
Perfect. All right.
Okay, so next question is from Roxanne, who is looking for records related to the Oakhurst Tuberculosis Hospital in Elma, circa 1930s to 40s.
So, Roxanne, I think the best way to look for some of that information, because I don't know that there's like actual records for the hospital, but I know that there's a lot of discussion about the hospital in the Grays Harbor County Commissioner's record, because especially if the hospital was formed specifically for the tuberculosis, and I know that's been the case in other tuberculosis hospitals that people have researched, is that there's a lot of information in the commissioner's record about the formation, or them checking in on how many patients, giving statistical information. I don't know if the other possibility, the other thing is if it was considered a local government hospital, or if it was a private hospital. So that's the other piece of it, is if it is a private hospital, it is harder to find records for those because they are not, those would not have been made available to us per se. And then the other piece of it is, did that hospital become a hospital that is currently that's currently still a hospital? Because oftentimes hospitals actually have their own archives.
All right, our next question is from Linda. Linda says, I'm looking for records on my great-great-grandfather who was a judge in Washington. He's not showing up in the Frontier Justice Guide to the Court Records of Washington Territory. Any suggestions on how to search this publication?
So the Frontier Justice cases are only indexed by the defendant and plaintiff, and not by the judge at the time. So the question would be, we do have an index of judges in our collections. And if it's from the territorial time, I think we might be able to find that, and be able to at least list, like, was he a judge and where was he a judge? So you could email us a name and we could check the index for that. And then once we know where, it's possible that some of the court cases from whatever county or area it's from, that would have his signature on it, or have a judge's statement or a judge's order with his signature on it.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I will tell you all, in case you were all wondering about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, that's some I've been helping a researcher out of Tennessee who's very interested in Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and you may all be wondering, well, what sort of records will we have about that? It turns out a lot. I've been looking at the governor's correspondence with letters that were written into the governor, as well as the game department, early Fish and Wildlife Department correspondence. And there was a governor's proclamation by Governor Dan Evans to declare the Sasquatch the state monster, with including a hair sample. And then there's also just a lot of really interesting letters and articles and things that have been collected over time. So at this point, I think I've got probably almost like a half cubic foot box that's like full of interesting information. Just a little tidbit. I saw a where are you and how do we get to you? So so we are located in Olympia, Washington on the Capitol campus. But we are one of 5 branches. So there's one in Cheney, Washington on the Eastern Washington University campus. There's one in Ellensburg on the Central Washington University campus. There's one in Bellingham on the Western Washington University campus. There's one in Bellevue at the Puget Sound. That's our Puget Sound Regional Branch on the Bellevue Community College campus. And then here in Olympia, we have the Southwest Regional Branch, which is the 9 counties in the south corner of the state, as well as the state records here in Olympia. All of the other branches hold the local records, government. It would be county, city, special districts, schools, etc. A little bit closer to where they were created, and it makes it a little bit easier to do the research closer to where they were. Of course, there are people who've moved across the state, and there are people who are all in Spokane, and you live in Olympia, that sort of thing. But we try to work with each other to try to help researchers get what they need if it's far away from where you are. Especially since COVID, we've made a lot of adaptations in how we help with that. And you can always email us. We always recommend emailing first, just because we want to make sure we're the right place, because what if we're not? We don't want you to travel all this way and get here all excited and find out that this is not the place for you to be. But that being said, we welcome you in. We are still taking in-person researchers. We do ask that you mask, social distance, and like I said, contact us ahead of time and make an appointment, just so we know what you're going to be doing, and also to help us make sure we have the right amount of people in our research space. We want to make sure we have enough room for everyone so everybody can be spread out.
All right, we do have another question. If I find a relative on a census and it says he's naturalized, where do I look for that record? No idea what state he might have been in at that time.
Okay, so if the census is a state census, is one of ours, if the census has to do with Washington State, and you happen to know, usually on the census itself, it will give you information at the top of the sheet as far as where it was taken. It may give some information about the district or the enumeration area. You'll want as much of that information as possible. And I will say, at least here in Washington State, many naturalizations occurred all the way up until 50s and 60s, 1950s, 1960s, even in the Superior Court. A Superior Court actually did some of those. So we do have some of those records. Many of our naturalization records are already up on the digital archives, but there are some information that's still not there. So we would need to know they were in the state of Washington when they naturalized. The tricky bit is a lot of people may have filed their intention to naturalize in one state, but then had actually went to another state and started the paperwork again. But I would say many of the other states work in the same way. So if you know where they are, you can talk to your local library or your local archives to find out a little bit more about naturalization. A lot of people will just refer you to NARA, the National Archives, because they do have a lot of those records there. They do keep, I know the branch in Seattle does keep microfilm that talk about that has a lot of naturalization records, and it does break it down by district, because there are places where only a district court existed, and that's where the naturalizations occurred. The tricky bit about naturalization, which that's probably a really good topic for me to talk about maybe next time. So February, for the February one, maybe I'll talk a little bit about naturalization and all the different types of records that go with that. And they change a lot over time.
Do we have any records at the state level about the Ording Veterans Hospital?
We do.
That was an easy one.
That's a short one. A lot of those are actually up on the digital archives. You can search by name on the digital archives, and once you find the record there, then you can contact us to see if there's any additional information. But I think the file is already mostly up there.
Kim would like to know, are there intern opportunities that ever come up with the state archives?
We have had interns in the past. Our building right now is pretty full, and with COVID, we have been limiting how many additional people we've been adding to our building, just because the numbers keep going up and down. But currently, people who are interested in interning can help a scribe, which I'm going to let Jameson talk a little bit about that before we close. But at any point, you can reach out to us and find out if we have any opportunities. Usually, they're not paid internships. Although if you're interested in a paid internship, you can talk to your the university that you're going to, your college, to find out if they partner with anyone for that. We have had people here in the past, but it has been a while since we've had paid internships. Most of the time it's a volunteer. And we are working on our volunteer paperwork and getting that all squared away. So hopefully we'll start taking volunteers again in person. That'll be nice.
I think that's pretty much it for the questions.
You want to talk about Scribe for a minute?
Sure. For anybody who doesn't know what Scribe is, which is probably most of you, it's an online program that we use where we take images of documents that we have and we put them online, and volunteers go in, they look at the documents, and they type out what the documents say. So pretty much we'll have a little fields on the screen. They say first name, last name, birth date, etc. And you'll read the record and type out what it says, because these are all older records. So they're it's oftentimes handwritten names or written just typed out on a typewriter. And all we have are digital images. We don't have the metadata to make them searchable. So the point of doing that is so that we can take these records and put them on the digital archives so people can go in and search for them when they do their research. I'll put a link in the comment section here if anybody would like to volunteer from home. This is done completely at your own discretion. I mean, if you want to do it in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, if you want to do one record, 1,000 records, it's up to you. It's completely on your own time. We have volunteers on there who index tens of thousands of records every month. And last month we only had, last month we had a lot of active volunteers. There were about 51 active volunteers last month, but they transcribed 97,000 records in Scribe. So that tells you how much work one volunteer can do. And it's just an enormous help in getting our records online. I don't know where we'd be without it. So, and if you want any more information about it, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put my email address in the comments, and you can ask me any questions that you like. I can send you tutorials on how Scribe works and show you the guide that kind of gives you a better explanation as to how volunteers go about indexing records.
Thank you, Jameson. I just want to thank everyone for being there today. Hopefully you learned a little bit of something about the archives. I'm hoping to do this. It's the third Friday of each month. I'll be coming back on. I will talk about something a little bit at the beginning and then open the floor up to questions. I hope you have enjoyed your time here. I've definitely enjoyed talking about this. This is something I feel very passionate about. I love interesting people in what we have and being able to connect people to our resources it brings me great joy. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.